Hey guys, Enigmatic Mr. L here to talk about what I personally consider to be the most overrated Fire Emblem unit in each game. So, a couple of notes before we get started. For one, which units you think are really hyped up in the fandom? That's going to vary a bit depending on which forums and posts you've read. So, a unit you think is overrated, I don't include. It might just be because I haven't seen people like hype them up. Secondly, overrated does not necessarily mean bad. Like, a lot of these units are good, some of them even really good. I just think they're not quite as good as what some other people make them out to be. With that out of the way, let's just get on to the list. Starting with Shadow Dragon and Blade of Light, I went with Jagan. So, in the first Fire Emblem game, all non HP stat caps are 20, and also stat boosters are really potent. They add like 5 to each stat as opposed to the usual just 2. And I've seen some people say, well, Jagan, he just never falls off. Just, give him all the stat boosters and he's great. And that's certainly an option, but I think there are other characters that you might want to use those stat boosters on. For example, you could do Marth, because even if you're not quite like soloing the game with him, you can allow, if you boost all of his stats up, he can do basically a lot of heavy lifting. You can warp him, and he acts as both your Caesar, who will seize the point and kill the boss, as opposed to other games you need like a boss killer and your lord. There's also just these others in his class, Cain and Abel, and later Hardin. With just a few level ups, a little bit of work, they'll quickly match up to Jagan's pace. Plus, they promote get even more stats then. Uh, Using all your stat boosts on Jagan, that's certainly a valid option, but I think it's not like the only option. There are other characters you might want to use those stat boosters on. For Fire Emblem Gaiden, I went with Sonya. Not too many people talk about Gaiden, so it's kind of hard to really come up with any characters that are over or underrated. But I have heard someone say that Sonya is the best unit in the game. Even if not that, I know there are some people who would say Sonya is better than Dean, as you can only get one of those two units in Celica's route. You fight one of them, whoever you don't fight joins your army later. And I think Sonya is a fine unit, even though she's not as good as Dean. It's not by much, but Dean, I would say, is definitely the better unit. All of Dean's base stats minus magic and attack are the same in this game. They're tied in that regard. Sonya has better resistance. Everything else Dean has better in. Better HP, better skill, better luck, better defense, and critically, he has more movement. Even if it is just by one, that 1 point of movement can add up. Yes, pretty much all of Sonya's growths are better than Dean, besides HP, but in Gaiden, your growths really don't matter that much because the main way you get stats is by promoting. It brings up your all of your stats up to the base stat line of the promoted class. There's also just the fact when Dean joins, he's 5 levels away from promoting to a Dread Fighter, whereas opposed to Sonya, she's 15 levels away from promoting. So just higher base stats and quicker to promotion. I would say Dean is the better unit. Again, Sonya is certainly usable. I would say there are reasons to choose Sonya, like Excalibur. Maybe you want to go with something like that, but I would definitely say Dean outshines her. For Mystery of the Emblem, I went with Aaron. In a discussion about Jagans, I once read someone say that like Aaron is the ideal Jagan. He's really helpful in the early game, like useful in the midway game. Then you like end up benching him. I think there are a few problems with that. One, this isn't like New Mystery of the Emblem where the early game chapters are that tough. Like in New Mystery of the Emblem, I would say Aaron is a great unit. He really helps you out a lot. Biggest problem with him is that he's not in the prologue. Plus, you can also reclass to like Sniper to help with Wyverns. Mystery of the Emblems, it's a game like before difficulty settings. You really don't need to rely on them. You can always just rely on your other like cavalry units. And also the big thing is just like 3 chapters later after he joins, you get Sirius, who just kind of completely blows Aaron out of the water. Better base stats, better growths. And yeah, even though Sirius is better, you could say we could just use both. And that's true, but I feel like if you're going to use another cavalry unit, it might be someone with like more long-term potential, especially because the early game chapters aren't that difficult. I just don't see much of a reason to use Aaron after Sirius joins. And he joins fairly quickly, and even when before he joins, Aaron he's not really that needed. For Genealogy of the Holy War, I thought about who to use here. I thought about doing Larcey, who pretty much any pairing you do with her, she's going to be really great in combat, but she's going to have trouble getting to the action. I didn't choose that in part because I have a soft spot for her. She's one of my favorite units, but I decided to go with Arthur. Specifically, if you make Lewin his father, pair Lewin with Tail to get Arthur with Forseti, or once he promotes, he becomes mounted, so Horsetti, as he's often called. Now, this is certainly a fine pairing. I would say it's like good. There are reasons to choose this over other pairings, but I've seen a lot of people say like this is definitely the best pairing. Like they treat it as a default, just because hey, you get Forsetti on a mount, you get it at the very start of the second generation, and there are definitely reasons to choose that. But I think some of the downsides potentially are overlooked. The main competition, Lewin as Arthur's father has, is in the form of a Sed. If you pair Lewin with Aranis, you get Sed with Forsetti. First of all, Lewin and Aranis is way easier to set up. They have a conversation in like chapter 4. If neither one are married, they just instantly fall in love. So you don't have to constantly pair you up. You don't have to constantly have them like adjacent to each other. And if you're going with Lewin Aranis, most likely you're going to go with like Azael Tail because he passes down both a magic stat and pursuit. And they likewise in chapter 4 they have a conversation. They don't immediately fall in love, but it does boost their love growth. But that's just one thing. It's a little bit set up. It's helpful, but it's not like essential. The other thing, if you go with this pairing, Arthur does not get pursuit, and you might be thinking, well, he doesn't need pursuit. He's got Forsetti. He's invincible. But with certain like trickier opponents, like later down the line, you really want to use like, especially if they like Pavice or something, you're going to want like all the hits you can get. You can't always rely like on Adept, or even if you can, you want like Pursuit and Adept. And that brings me to like the other point is that the stat caps for Mage Knight are lower than the stat caps for Sage. And for just generic enemies, generic mooks, it really doesn't make a difference. Just Forsetti is going to wipe them out. But for some of the trickier opponents, like say Arion in Chapter 9, or Arvis in Chapter 10, the Pegasus Knight Trio in like in-game, those stat caps that higher stat caps that Sed has, they really can play a difference. Especially, like Arvis fight, he has Nihil, so you can't just rely on like a Forsetti crit. I do think there are reasons still to choose this, but I don't think it's as clear cut and dry as some other people make it to be. At the very least, I'd say there is reasons to go with Lewin Aranis as opposed to Lewin and Tail 2. For Thracia 776, I went with Carrion. My first playthrough, I used him, looked at his growths, he leveled quite well, he was a great unit. Oh, this is pretty good, doesn't require that much investment, but after thinking about it more, there's something to be said for like reasonable investment, like hey, just give this stat booster or two that not too many other characters want, or this item that isn't in weapon that isn't in high demand, and you get a lot of mileage out of it as opposed to other units. And then there's something to be said for favoritism. For one, Kieran gets a sword in an event in Chapter 9, which doubles EXP gain, but it's not his personal weapon. Anyone can use that. Secondly, the big thing that made me think, well, maybe Karen really isn't all that great. He's a fun unit to train, don't get me wrong, but you compare him to like Kane and Alva, who joined just like 1 or 2 chapters later, depending on whether or not you go to Chapter 8X. And these are like the units everyone memes on, just like the Scrub Squad comes up. Look at these low-level cavalry units. If you want to train them, fine. Carrion's stats really aren't that different from them. He has a little bit more, he has 1 point of resistance as opposed to 0, and he has a little bit more luck, but some other stats, they actually beat him out. I still think Carrion is better than him. He joins earlier. He has like 1 Vigor Star, so he has a 5% chance to move again. He has a follow-up critical multiplier 4 as opposed to their Kane and Alva's 1, so if he follows up, he's most likely going to crit. But overall, he's a growth unit that you can use. You can scroll stack him. You can give him like the Paragon Sword. You can give him like certain other scrolls to teach him skills, but if you gave the save level character to like pretty much any unit, they're going to be great. So he requires a bit of investment to get going. For Binding Blade, this is going to be a controversial one. I went with Milady. Now, Milady is a great unit, to be sure. But I think when you're going to talk about like best unit in Binding Blade, it almost always goes to like, oh, Milady's the best unit, hands down. She's one of the best units in the series. And I'm like, is she though? Like, one, I would say even Marcus is better than her. Even though I pretty much bench Marcus when I'm like a fourth of the way through the game. Helping out with like that early game hell as a major contribution that Milady's not around for. Then another more available unit, Rutger, available since Chapter 4. Even if for nothing else, just helping out with boss kills is an amazing unit. Fantastic. Both of the dancers join a few chats for Milady there, and having additional movement options, additional ways to choose how you want to, if you want to attack or heal or what. I think that's more beneficial than Milady. I think the most fair comparison from a lady would be to look at Percival, who just joins like 2 or 3 chapters later, depending on whether you go to the Gaiden chapter. A lot of people's reaction to Percival is like, yeah, he's a great unit. He's somewhat held back by his availability, but once you get him, you should use him. And I think that's true of Milady as well. Like a great unit, you should use her, but she's not like the best unit in the game. Compare Milady's stats to Percival. On hard mode, the stats can vary a little bit, depending on how like RNG goes. But when Milady joins, assuming you like auto promote her, Percival will have a good amount more speed, more HP, more res, and more luck. And Milady just slightly beats him out on defense. And yeah, sure, Milady, she flies. That's an advantage to be sure. She joins a few chapters earlier. But I would say honestly that Percival's better. Plus, Percival has automatic A in lances and swords. Once Milady promotes, I think it's like B in lances and like E at swords. And flying in utility is something she has. Percival doesn't. And she's available for a few more chapters. But I just think, yeah, she's a great unit. I just think there are other better units. So you could even make the case that Lance and Allen are better. I wouldn't quite go there, but it's like, yeah, they're good units early on. They kind of fall off like late into the game, but at least they're around for a lot more chapters than Milady. That's something to be said. Overall, Milady's a great unit. I still think she's a little bit overrated. All right, next we have Blazing Blade, where I went with Geats or Geitz. Pretty solid unit if you can manage to get him, get enough stats, weapon ranks. He's solid. He's all right. The main thing going against him is just his recruitment. In order to get to the chapter where you recruit him, the combined levels of Eliwood, Hector, and Lynn have to be 50 or greater. And I think a lot of people say you're probably going to use your lords anyway, especially on the first playthrough. That's true. But, on subsequent playthroughs, you realize just kind of how lackluster Eliwood, and especially Lynn are. It's probably not worth the effort of training them just so you can get like the decent unit. You have to like train a mediocre and pretty poor unit at that. And especially like on higher difficulties where EXP gain is like so limited. Like even if you want to use Eliwood and Lynn long term, it can be difficult to meet the EXP thresholds to make it to his chapter. If he just joined like in a different chapter, like chapter you always go to, I probably wouldn't put him on this list. I'd have to think of like someone else, maybe like Vida. It's like, yeah, she's a Wyvern Lord, but she joins late. In my playthrough, when I first used her, she died to a 4% crit. But that's just me. It's personal experience. Overall, solid unit. Just wishes recruitment was a little easier. For Sacred Stones, I went with Franz. And its reputation has changed over the years, but there was a time when people said like Franz is like the second or third best unit in the game, just behind Seth and maybe Vanessa. Nowadays, it's like, well, they kind of realize that the difference between Franz and like the other cavalry units, Kyle and Ford, even though Franz is probably better, the difference is not that much. Like you can use Ford or Kyle, and it won't be that different impacted that much. Nowadays, people kind of realize, well, Tethys, even though she joins late, having dancing for Seth is busted. Mulder warping Seth, Vanessa flying carrying Seth, like they're all units that are better than Franz. There's also just the fact that as a growth unit, there is a possibility of him just getting RNG screwed. He can't rely on his bases. Good. He's not that much different than the other cavalry units, though, and I think their reputation has improved a little bit, and Franz has gone down a little bit, but still a perfectly solid unit. For Path of Radiance, I went with Har. So Har joins somewhat late into the game. Great mobility, befitting his class Wyvern Rider, or Wyvern Lord. Good attack, good defense. Resistance is a little bit lacking. That can be somewhat of a problem with like the siege tomes coming up. Speed is somewhat lackluster. Needs like a speed wing or something to meet like doubling thresholds, but he's still solid. Main reason he's on there is just because in Radiant Dawn he's like a beast of a unit, and some people get that mixed up. Path of Radiance. Like I saw someone streaming Path of Radiance. I don't even remember who it was. They got hard killed, and they're like, "How in the world do you get hard killed? He's practically invincible." So no, you're thinking of Radiant Dawn. That's the big reason he's on here, just because like some people end up confusing him with Radiant Dawn. Har's good, but he has the availability issues and the speed issues. Last time I played Path of Radiance, the chapter recruit Jill, I accidentally cleared it too quickly before I could recruit her. And I was like, I don't feel like playing. I'm just going to press on. Honestly, I missed Har's Brave Axe that he has more than the unit himself. But, Wyvern Lord, always good. Just not, Har himself is not, like, broken in this game. Speaking of Wyvern Riders in Radiant Dawn, I went with Jill. This is might be another controversial one. Um, Jill, a lot of people say is like just use your stat boost on her, the Draco Shield, the Energy Drop, the Seraph Robe, feed her the bonus the experience, and she'll be great. That's true enough, especially in like easy and normal mode. And there is some reason to choose her over other units because no matter how much EXP and stats you give other units, like they're not gonna fly like Jill. Like flying, helping like with swamp terrain, that's something only Jill can do. So you could argue it's not just favoritism. But the big reason she's on here is just hard mode. With EXP so drastically reduced and bonus EXP, it's so hard to come by and it doesn't boost stats as much. When I played hard mode, it's like I tried to use Jill like last time and played it like easy and normal. I just found like she couldn't get her like quite up to snuff as I expected. Just ended up going with other units that came at like higher level, better base stats. Still solid unit. As good as option as any, I think, of like training up. Because I think the meta strategy for like the Dawn Brigade is only invest in like 2 or so members, so you have enough experience to go around. And Jill's a solid candidate as any, but looking back, I think you'd also do the same with like Nolan or maybe even someone like Edward, and you'd be not really that much worse off. For Shadow Dragon, I went with Ogma. Some say like, oh, he's great. He has like the whole Ogma archetype, but looking at it, it's like, yeah, he's fine. Like he's serviceable. He only has a 30% speed growth. You got to reclass him if you want to, get him out of that. And just the fact that weapon triangle is a thing in this game as opposed to the original. He faces lots of lance wielding enemies, so he's constantly at weapon triangle disadvantage. Still like reasonable filler, I guess. For New Mystery of the Emblem, I went with Julian. So if you want the best ending, if you want to recruit all of like the maidens at the end, you have to have like Julian, Merrick, Sirius, and Minerva join your party, and they talk to like a specific maiden. So that leaves a lot of people saying, well, I better train them up if they're going to be used like in the final map. Sirius and Minerva are a great unit, so there's reason to use them regardless of that. Merrick, he's a decent mage, like he's good. Julian, no matter how much you train him up, he's stuck in the thief class. He can't change classes. He can't promote. Really, there's no reason to like train him up. He'll be useful here and there because Marth, he can only be in so many places at once with his Fire Emblem like chest key. So yeah, he'll be useful here and there, depending on what the map provides. Like, if there's a lot of chests, you might want to deploy him, but there's no real reason to like train him up. Even if you do, he's still gonna have trouble like surviving anything the final map. And especially if you're playing on like outside of lunatic mode, when you have like warp, it's pretty easy to keep like a base Julian out of harm's way. Just warp him, talk to like a sister, maybe like rescue him back, warp him. He'll be perfectly safe. For Fire Emblem Awakening, this one you could argue is a bit of a cop out, but I went with all the child units except for maybe Lucina because she joins automatically. So the child units, depending on what pairings you get, they're going to have like great growths, and if you raise them up to the level of like their parents are, they're going to surpass their parents. They can also get certain skills that make them like Gale Force, that sort of thing, make them really busted. The main problem is these are 2 caveats which you could granted. That's a pretty big caveat. Assuming you're not playing on lunatic mode, which I think a lot of people aren't. That's kind of a really hard mode entry, playing like normal or hard, and assuming you're only really playing about the main story, like beat Grima, save the world. You're not paying much attention to DLC. There's really not much reason to use the child units. They come at level 10. They're way under leveled compared to those you're using on your army. And yeah, if you train them up, they'll surpass them. But you're probably just better off just using the army you already have. You can clear the game quickly. There's also just the fact of how they're recruited. Outside Lucino joins, they have certain parallel chapters. A lot of these chapters can be really tough if you enter them right away. And if you wait later to like your team's this higher level, then the child just has even further to get out of the hole. That can be fun. Like I liked using Inigo and Severa. In my last playthrough, I had them do some heavy lifting in the Apotheosis chapter. They were vital there, but again, that's like DLC outside of the main story. So they certainly can be fun to use, but despite like their high ceiling, there's generally not much reason to train them up. For Fire Emblem Fates, it was kind of tricky. I considered splitting into 3 games: Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation, but it was already tricking up just choosing one, especially in like modern Fire Emblem, where like pretty much any unit can be good. In the end, I decided to go with Effie. I've heard a lot of people say like Effie is what an Armor Knight should be. She fixes the problem of an Armor Knight. I'm like, does she? Now, granted, she might have just been under leveled for me. Maybe she has a better class option, but to me, it's like early game when you don't have many other options. It's like, yeah, she'll serve her role. Later in the game, she does get wary fighter if you promote her to a general, but it really doesn't fix her offense issue. She still only hits once, and you really want you to be like doubling. When I used Effie towards the late game, I just had her basically just be like a stat backpack. Didn't really like use her much. Again, maybe there's some like hidden tech I don't know, like, oh, you marry her off with this character so she can use the marriage seal to get this class, get this skill. Maybe so, but to me, she didn't live up to hype that others set up for me. For Fire Emblem Echo Shadows of Valentia, this was another tricky one. Meta of the game has changed a lot, but like on Celica's routes, like who's the best unit between Katria, Pala, and Leon? They're all great. Maybe like those kind of shift around a bit, but they're all great. On Alm's route, certain classes are considered like overrated or underrated. So like maybe Mage Cliff isn't quite that good. Probably make him like a dread fighter, then like or make him into a mercenary. Then once he gets a dread fighter, loop him back to villager, get Bow Knight. That's more like a class thing. In the end, I decided to go with Delphia. I've seen like 1 or 2 people hype her up. And the game's narrative really hypes her up. It's like, hey, Luthier's bloodline, it's more prominent in women. She has good speed and good attack, which in most games, that would be all you need. The problem is when in Shadows of Valentia, where your spells drain HP, she just doesn't have like the durability. She's already low. The HP drains it. The HP cost drains it even more. She can't constantly lose spells. And some of the best spells she can use. You get them like fairly late into the game. Honestly, in some ways, her brother Luthier might be better, just because better HP and I believe better defense, even if he is just kind of mediocre mage. But overall, you're probably better off if you can get past the early hurdle of like get Mage Cliff off the ground, or especially if you go like Mage Toman. You're probably off just sticking with them, and you probably don't need another mage to your army. For Fire Emblem Three Houses, another kind of controversial move, I'm going to say Lysithea, who I think is simultaneously the most underrated and overrated character in the game. So, Lysithea, big thing people say about, oh, she one-shots the Death Knight with Dark Spikes. Well, that's like an accomplishment, but other characters can do that, like Sylvain's with like the Lance of Ruin can help in like Chapter 6. Other chapters, you don't even really need to fight him. You can just like fight the other units, you can just ignore him. So it's not that big of a accomplishment. It's just one thing. People tend to underlook her like spells. It's like, yeah, having high magic is one thing, but that can be replicated with like stat boosters. Her spell list is what really gets her up there. Also, part of the reason I chose her is like, I think Lysithea is an amazing unit. Don't get me wrong. You should pretty much recruit her and use her like regardless of what route you're doing. But I've heard some people say it's like, oh, she's like the best unit in the game. And like, maybe, if we're talking about like all 3 or 4 routes, like contributions, like all added up. But if that's the case, I definitely think Byleth has her outbeat. He'll be useful in every route. And unlike Lysithea, Byleth can actually take a hit. And Lysithea, if any unit so much as like flicks her, she's gonna die. Like I've been seen some people say like Lysithea is better than Dimitri. Again, if we're talking about like across all routes, that's fair enough. Dimitri is only available on one route. But just the blue lines routes, and no way. Dimitri actually takes a hit. And like, yeah, Lysithea is one that warps the boss killer, but that's a contribution. But Dimitri's actually doing like heavy lifting, killing the boss, or enemy phasing a lot of units with Battalion Wrath, Battalion Vantage. There's also just the fact a little bit. Some people say the investment you put in Lysithea borderlines on favoritism, like breed a bunch of magic boosting stat boosters, feed them all to Lysithea, give her the Thyrsus, even though anyone can really use it. Buy the paid DLC class Peregrine to Darkflyer, give her the boots for additional movement, feed all your EXP into her. I do think Lysithea is a good candidate for like some of those things. She makes better use of them than others. But like again, anyone can use Thyrsus, so there is that. Still an amazing unit. If I were to make a quick tier list of 3 houses, it'd be like Anna's at the bottom in C tier, no supports, no real niche. Almost everyone else is in B tier. Good units, can be made to do anything. Lysithea's alone A tier. and then the Lords and Byleth in S tier. Isn't as good as the main Lords because they can actually, and Byleth because they can actually take a hit, but still a great unit. And last but not least, we have Fire Emblem Engage. I went with Kagetsu. I've seen some people really praising him, like, well, it's like such an overbusted like character. Some people say he's the best unit in the game, and he's good. Don't get me wrong. And once he joins, he's great. I think there are other units that are better, like Chloe. Even though she doesn't have the raw firepower of Getsu, she's contributing for a lot more of the game. She can get inherit Sigurd's Canter ability sooner. Flying is always useful. Ivy and Hortensia, they both have flying as well. Particularly Hortensia, she can make a very good utility with her personal skill and her promoted class skill. Help with like Micaiah, Warp, all that good stuff. Kagetsu is good, and I've tried in a few classes, left him at Swordmaster, changed him to Hero. Maybe I just wasn't using the optimal build, but towards the end of the game, it's like he's contributing, he's doing well, but he's not really stand out as opposed to like what I've heard other people make him out to be. Like he's this amazing all-star unit. He's good, but once like later in the game, once other units are like leveling, getting the skills they want, the emblems, he doesn't really stand out all that much, in my opinion. And that is my list. Thank you so much for watching. Any units you think I feel underrated, like they do live up to the hype, they're great. Any units that I didn't mention you think are overrated, please let me know in the comments below. This is Enigmatic Mr. L, signing out.